I'd now like to introduce today's session, which tackles two subjects: identifying the key concepts of data literacy and learning how to become a data analyst. On the topic of data literacy, the presenters will discuss things like quantitative thinking, the basics of data types, structure and storage, and data visualization. On the topic of how to become a data analyst, the presenters will discuss the tools for independent upskilling and what hiring managers are looking for. I'm going to hand it over now to Kari Peterson, an institutional research analyst in the Office of Planning and Analysis, and she will kick off today's session. Please use your applause icon in the reactions area of Zoom to welcome Kari.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thanks for being here on a Friday right before a 3-day holiday. Good to see you all. Yeah, so the structure of our talk is going to be, we're going to have a panel first, where we're with some campus experts, and then we're going to switch into sort of the nitty-gritty and the details of how to expand your data literacy. So first I would like to just briefly introduce the folks who are going to be speaking on the panel, and they're going to do a little bit more thorough job describing what they do on campus. But I've been fortunate to be joined by 3 folks. Elizabeth Davies is a data analyst at Career Center, and she'll be speaking about the actual experience of being an analyst on campus and her career path. And then Shirley Giraldo is the lead for social and informal learning on campus, and she'll be speaking about practical, easy ways to do professional development on your own. And lastly is James Cow, who's joining us from talent acquisition, and he's going to be kind enough to discuss some of the nuances around the different classifications and types of data titles on campus. And I'm Kari Peterson, and I am a research analyst from Office of Planning and Analysis, and I'm also the chair and founder of the Cal Data Visualization Network Community of Practice. So you have a link in the chat to the slide deck that I'm going to be reviewing. It has a bunch of links in it. In that deck is a link to the resources. There's a Drive folder I made with a ton of literature around what we're going to be talking about if you want to do more research on your own. Okay, so let's see. Suddenly all I can see is myself. And let's see if I can hide self-view. How do I hide self-view? Oh no, where'd it go? I'll do this. This is good enough. Okay. So I would like to have Elizabeth, and then Shirley, and then James just briefly speak up about their experiences, what they're talking about today.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I have been a data analyst at the Career Center for just over a year now. Previous to that, I was the data analyst for the enrollment strategy and division of Golden Gate University. And previous to that, I worked as a project policy analyst, a financial services analyst, and an AA3, Berkeley's campus shared services at the time. I think it's BRS now. But so yeah, I have a undergraduate degree in accounting, but I decided not to go into accounting and charted my way into data analysis. So thanks for having me.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Shirley Giraldo. Thank you, Kari and Katie, for having us all here. When I look at the folks who are speaking today, I'm like, I don't know enough about data analytics, but I know how to help people get to where they want to go. So thank you for the opportunity to speak on that. My role really actually has shifted a little bit over the summer. My focus used to be primarily on helping people grow and learn in informal and social learning ways. So that's everything that happens essentially kind of outside of a classroom environment. So you learn by doing, you learn from others. And now my focus is really on employee engagement. So I'll be talking a little bit more about what folks can do to get to where they want to be and build up those practical skills and experiences. So that's what I have for you all today.
Hi, everyone, and thank you also to Kari and Katie for the invitation to participate today. So my name is James Gow. I'm part of the Central HR or People and Culture Department and part of the Talent Acquisition team. So I also am not a data analyst, but what I hope to be able to contribute today is just some considerations around the analyst role, what that might mean and on this campus in a variety of different functions and departments. And hopefully that sort of gives a sense to people about the possibilities and the different paths that are available for you if this is something that you're interested in to eventually sort of move towards a data analyst role. Thank you.
Great. Okay. I'm going to do my best to moderate the chat if you have questions while we're doing the panel. And then I will pivot to being the presenter and sharing my screen afterwards. And Shirley has been kind enough to offer to do some moderating of the chat for me. As I'm sure you all have now become aware, it can be a little overwhelming to manage all of the blinking lights and boxes on your computer screen while you're on a Zoom call. So that is to say, if I miss your text to me, I apologize, and be patient, and I'll try and get to you as soon as I can. It looks like I'm going to go ahead and repaste in the slide link. Oops. One more time in the chat. Okay, so you should be able to have access to that now. And all right, so we'll get started. Briefly, just to introduce the general topic, I think that the group is relatively self-selected. We're here to discuss data literacy because we have some constellated relationship or interest in it and or data analysis. And my hope is that presentations typically are geared towards folks on campus who are analysts, who do that work, and or are interested in becoming analysts who do assessment as part of their job. And my hope here is that we're going to be focusing data literacy through the lens of the analyst. And practically speaking, the lens of the analyst on campus here at Berkeley, which is always a little bit different, right, from everywhere else. So that will be the main focus. And we will touch also on general concepts around literacy that aren't as technical, because there are people who do consume information who aren't analysts and or who may be required to deal or manipulate data in their position that don't consider themselves to be analysts. And so we'll be looking at concepts through that perspective as well. So with that, I'll get started and kick off with a question for the panel. The first one is, how do you broaden your skill set for a new position? And if you don't need the skills for your current role, how do you keep them polished?
I can take a stab at this first, if that's all right. Okay, so I think it's challenging sometimes because people, when they think about their roles, they think about, well, I have to do X, and so that is it. There's no room for anything else. And I think what you'll find, particularly at Berkeley, is that there's always space and room to do and innovate and create better experiences, even in the work that you're already doing, which is X, right? So for example, I used to work in another unit on campus and we provided services to students, but we never had a real metric to see how is the work that the services that we're providing, kind of like an overall arching view, how is that helping students, you know, things of that nature. So there was an opportunity there for me and a colleague, Jenny McNulty. We actually presented on this with CAN a couple years ago on how to create a data report, a visual data graphic for I just realized I was on mute. Was I on mute? No. Oh, okay. My mouse hovered over the mute button, so it made it look like I was mute. I was like, oh no. Okay. So there's always an opportunity. Whatever you're doing, you can measure it, right? You can see the impact. And I would say that would be the natural way for you to go. Another approach could be if there's something that you just see that needs to be done, that might not necessarily be with your role, but could be beneficial to the services that you provide, or the, let's say with more of a technical aspect, how you can increase return on investment, maybe on cost, things of that nature. So it's pretty important in that regard. Another way that you could branch out from your typical job, and this is really dependent on your bandwidth, is through volunteering. I think there's no better way to gain, to really expand your skill set than learning by doing. So when you volunteer, you can do it, let's say, through a staff organization, maybe even outside of Berkeley if you want to volunteer for a nonprofit. It's a great way to gain experience that is relatively lower risk than your day-to-day role. So those would be some of the ways that you can expand your skill set without it having to be something that's already ingrained in your specific job description.
I can chime in, and I would co-sign a lot of what Shirley said. That was my personal experience. When I came to Berkeley as an AA3, I didn't have a lot of, hadn't had a real professional career before that. And a lot of the things that I'd done, I volunteered at my daughter's PTA as the treasurer. And so I got experience creating budgets and talking to people about, money information and explaining it to lay people, which was very useful. I also, I think volunteering, once I was at Berkeley, there was a lot of, I volunteered for projects that came up in various places, like, it's like, how do we measure, at CSS, one of the things was, how do we measure this? And being able to go into Bearby and figure out how we could pull out that information that people were looking for was really useful, and having supervisors that recognized that I was interested in that and would refer that work to me really progressed my career and gave me examples of projects that I had worked on, or I had concrete things to show people or talk about in an interview. I think also I have used a lot of like online resources, online tutorials. We have it used to be lynda.com, but now LinkedIn Learning, that as a Berkeley staff member you have access to. They have some great programs for at all sorts of levels. So that's another thing that I've used to broaden my skill sets. And also the staff groups, being a part of CAN. I think I was a member of CAN, shortly after I came, and then the Cal Data Visualization Network, and just meeting those people. I also, at CSS, we had a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan group that was put together by the staff, and in volunteering for that, I got some good experience with survey data and just meeting people across campus and across my department, and sort of that informal networking. It was, even if it didn't result in a direct job, it definitely has resulted in expanded skills and being able to have people to reach out to for all sorts of things.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's awesome.
Kari, I'll add something here too. So, following up on what Shirley and Elizabeth said about, kind of how to gain additional sort of practical skills outside of your current role, one of the other considerations that I wanted to mention is to sort of think about actually your current role, because sometimes people are focused very much on the sort of titling and what exact work that they're doing. And a lot of times it's also about the translation. So what that means is, what are you doing right now, and what skills that are being used that can actually translate to another role? And so one of the things, for example, that Elizabeth mentioned in her intro is that she's been a different kind of analyst at Berkeley. And so in terms of at Berkeley, where there's job classifications and working titles, and what all of that means. And so hopefully I can talk to a little bit more about that later. But one of the things that we always sort of advise for people to think about is, what is the work that you're doing that kind of demonstrates skill sets that would be transferable to other things? So maybe you're not currently analyzing a data set, for example, but are you reviewing information, or are you reviewing policy, and then are you then making an interpretation of it that then you then communicate that to someone else? Because those are transferable skills to positions such as an analyst or data analyst. So just keeping that in mind too, which is there may be skills that you're already using that you haven't actually considered just speaking and we're talking about in a particular way.
Perfect, thank you. That's exactly what I was going to add, only you said it better. What I heard in Elizabeth's story is basically a couple of skills that are transferable and directly related to data literacy, but are not what you might consider a technical or hard skill. One of which is saying yes, right? Taking on something, being willing to sort of be flexible and learn on the fly. Another one is having curiosity, right? I heard in your story that you were basically you were asking questions, right? And you started at a place where you didn't have any answer, and you maybe didn't have a clean and tidy, set of data to query, right? You kind of did some of that work on your own.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lot of going in and piecing things together, problem solving, and that is, I think that's a very analyst thing, but I do like, having a problem and trying to come up, even if it requires reviewing a transaction line by line and tying each little individual column to the right piece of data so that we all know what we're talking about and making that really clear. And I think the only thing that I would add to that is also like really practicing being able to communicate what you've learned to other people. I think that that's something that I have learned and I have gotten pretty good at, and also that it's one of my assets when I've interviewed or when I've had jobs is that I can talk to people at different levels about the information. So sometimes it's just people just want an answer, or they want a really non-technical answer to maybe something that you had to do a lot of technical work to get to, and being able to speak to their level and convey it with some confidence is really important.
Yeah, perfect. And those are, key skills. And to what James was saying, the idea of reframing what you're already doing, right? I think is super important. I think a lot of us do a lot of this work every day, and we don't even realize that we can consider it to be, part of the skill set or the toolbox of a data analyst. Thank you. Okay. Oh, I meant to say. Oh, great. Okay, so we're getting some questions from the audience. Feel free to put them in chat. I will try and keep my eye on that. We have a question from Kelly Ball. She would like to know, she'd be interested to hear about how the panelists make time in their day for everyday, daily skills, additional skill development in their day-to-day work.
So I'll chime in here. So I think there's a couple different ways of doing that. Some of it is, if you have an understanding with your boss that you're trying to gain this skill and you're going to spend 20 minutes a day looking, doing some tutorial or something, that might be one thing. Also, if you have something that you do with one skill, so like one thing that I've done in the past is like, there's so much of Berkeley runs on Excel, and like I've done, especially early on, everything was just, all my work was in Excel because that was what was available and that was easy in a lot of ways. But as I've advanced, if there's something that I know how to do in Excel, I'll make myself learn how to do it in R, or use another tool or Tableau or something, like use some other tool to replicate that work. Then you have a new skill in that tool, I think is.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's perfect, right? That's the jumping off place. And for me, I feel like, if I can speak this a little bit, it really helps to have a project. You have to kind of be in that sweet spot, right? Of like not having the pressure of like a product that's due, in 5 minutes. But also like having, some reason, right? It can't just be like you're learning it in the abstract, because, well, for me anyway, just goes right out. I can completely forget everything, so really what helps is like being able to apply it. And I think it's not 100%, but campus is getting generally better at giving people access to the tools needed, right, to do that stuff. A lot of, in the past, the silos have insisted, that like data needed to be protected and you couldn't afford the tool, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a little bit of a change in perspective on that. And I think that part of the new shift in the way that we're performance managed includes this opportunity, right, to grow these skills and to recognize that realistically, it's better for the campus to invest time in us doing this, day to day than it is to try and hire a whole new person, right, with all the skills. So we have another, achieve together performance. Oh, perfect. Jan Crosby Taylor says, as part of the Achieve Together, our new performance program, there is an expectation to have one development goal, right? So yeah, exactly, perfect. Knowing that there's a culture, right, of data-driven decision making and appreciation for that, and the recognition that that skill set will get rusty if you don't use it, is super helpful. Thank you. All right. The second question is, I think, James, I'll have you start with this if you don't mind. What are the keywords recruiters are looking for on resumes for data analyst positions?
Yeah, so I'll certainly try to answer that. And so I'll start with the short answer, and then I'll then sort of take a step back and kind of talk about a bigger picture thing, which is that it depends on the job. And so there's no sort of exact same keywords that we use for even within analyst roles or for a data analyst, and just it depends on the job, and it depends on what the hiring manager is looking for, and whether that's communicated to us by them or through the job description. But I wanted to sort of take a step back though and just mention that a big part of this discussion today is talking about the data analyst, but what I sort of referenced before was the word analyst. And so in my sort of perspective and a lot of what I do, and some of this information is coming from our colleagues in compensation and classification as well, of which I am not an expert, but I did sort of check with them before this conversation today, which is at Berkeley, you have working titles and payroll titles or job classifications. And so the word analyst comes up on both things. And so you want to sort of be more thoughtful about what that actually means, or to me anyway, I want to be thoughtful about what that means. So in the classification side, there's many different analyst types. There is the research data analyst, but there's also, as Elizabeth was mentioning, financial services analyst, financial analyst, project policy analyst, procurement analyst. So the word analyst actually exists in many, many different job functions and families. And then in working title, it's not always reflected there. Unfortunately, working titling at Berkeley is very inconsistent. And part of that is the decentralized nature that we have. We do our best in the acquisition team to try and advise our hiring managers so that the working title actually really makes sense. But what you probably have seen is just that there is inconsistency in certain areas where the similarly leveled positions might be named a manager in one area, and whether they're actually managing or not, and then an analyst in another. So just in terms of the classification, what I and our compensation classification team sort of did was we looked through all of the job families that had the analyst title in it, whether again it be a financial analyst or a financial services analyst or a project file analyst or data analyst. And what we saw is that there is, as expected, consistency of some of the language as it relates to the knowledge, skills, and abilities that would usually be asked of that role. And those are what's then usually translated to the required qualifications of jobs that hiring managers can list. And then again, certainly depending on the function and the hiring manager, what that department is, how well they're resourced or not in terms of what other skill sets might be available on the team, then they're looking for different things. And so, but in terms of very sort of not basics, but the core of what we saw, of the commonality of what we saw across a lot of these positions, is that it relates to the ability to gather and prepare, interpret, and review, and then communicate information. And I'm using the word information because it's not specifically data in terms of lines. It could be data in terms of numbers, but it could be, as I was mentioning before, about policy or text or other kinds of information. So those are sort of our sense, the kind of core skill sets of these job families. And then it then depends on what then, now moving back to answering the question, what we look for then is, it depends on the job. So in terms of if it's, there may be certain departments that are specifically looking for example, they're requiring them people to have knowledge of, as an example, Tableau. And then in that case, we would be looking for Tableau. But not all of the positions will be looking for that. So it again depends. But in terms of the understanding and working with information through sort of the actions that I mentioned, those would be sort of some of the core of what we saw in general.
Awesome. Thank you, James. That I think is, that brief discussion is so important to people who are here on campus and looking to advance, sort of getting a general grounding in the concepts and the perspective of talent acquisition, right? I think it's just fascinating, and it's something that's, for me, it was definitely not native, right? I didn't necessarily understand all of that coming in. I think that campus has its own labyrinthine way of doing things, right? And we're a behemoth, that makes sense, but it can be really a lot to wrap your head around. So it's really cool to hear sort of all of that put together succinctly. Yep, thank you, Juliet. Juliet mentioned that D-Lab is another great resource. So folks are putting links in chat to professional development resources. So thank you, super helpful, and keep it coming. Okay, so I feel like you kind of answered my next question, James, which is what are the main types of analyst careers on campus, sort of pathways, but do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure, I'll try. So I know that, obviously a lot of the discussion today is thinking about data literacy and data analyst. And so again, I'll kind of speak more broadly about the idea of analyst or analysis and sort of are the different paths and how that could potentially lead. And so I'm just keeping an eye also on chat in case something comes up. So as I was mentioning, there's a lot of the different job families. And when you look at and kind of carry what you were talking about in terms of Berkeley and the complexity and the behemoth that we are. So central classification and compensation sent me sort of a list of all of the job functions and families. And I believe it was 2 pages long. And it's just, that's the way that we, in a back end HR way, organize the city that we are. I mean, as you imagine, we have, we have university health services, we have student services. It's just of so many different functions that exist. So in terms of pathways, it depends on, I will sort of pull back a little bit here and say it depends on what people are looking for. And what that means is, are they looking to be an analyst, and if so, what kind? What kind of information do you want to work with? What kind of department or sort of working sort of environment would you like? Because at Berkeley, with it being so large, you could work within departments where you may be slightly closer to the academia in terms of the teaching, the research, and work some of the student services, or you can also work in sort of central administration, where it sort of provides a lot of support and guidance to the various different units. So there's different areas and functions that you could work, and that's the first question for people to consider. And then I think after that then is, as you sort of want to continue in your career, are you interested in being an individual contributor or eventually moving into management? And so that's also sort of a different kind of approach and or path. And So it's just so I know I'm not really answering the question because I'm asking questions back, but I think that it really, because it depends on what people are looking for, but that the various pathways are there. And then another sort of way of considering that too is, again, the transferability of skills. And so, the ability to sort of interpret data or information and it makes sense of it, and to storytell or visualize, in Kari's terms, and then talk about and communicate that to others. Those are skills and that could work in other kinds of things. And so in sort of certain large technical projects, and Katie might know this working with me before on that, is when we've had to hire, for example, business systems analysts. It's sort of a lot of the work was, as an example, the translation and the interpretation between a technical system to the users. And so, again, a lot of the analyst skills would sort of potentially apply there. And so just thinking again about what are the skills that you would learn, and then you can sort of apply to an area of interest. But I think it's up to each person to sort of try and consider for themselves what interests them, what about their jobs that they really enjoy, and what more do they want to learn, and how that might then translate into a role in the future.
Perfect, thank you. So we're fast and flying on chat. We just put a bunch of links in there recently. So there's two that touch on sort of the job families and collections that James was speaking to. The one that Juliet gave us, the UC Job Builder, ucop.edu, is super helpful. And I just sent in a link to the Grow Your Skills page of People and Culture that has all of like the sort of self-development links, everything around what People and Culture itself offers people to do sort of like on their own for development. We had another question about what kind of information do analysts work with at Berkeley? Numbers, policy, what else? And it looks like some folks are answering. Elizabeth said business process. It's great, thank you, yeah. Feel free to everyone weigh in if they have something on that to the chat to respond. I mean, I think there's just, that scope is very broad. There's a lot out there. There's business systems, right? There's IT, and there's so many things that need analyzing. So speaking of the paths, what is the best way to advance? So let's say you are in a path and then you want to take the next step, or you may want to get into a different job classification on campus. What are the best ways to do that? Elizabeth's laughing.
Well, I guess I don't know that I have a clear, like, pass it off to someone else to answer for that. I would say that keeping an eye on job postings, so like especially like, there's all the campus job postings, and if you are in a place where you think that your supervisor is really supportive of that kind of thing, you can also talk with them. I've had a couple of supervisors that were very progressive in that way for me, and that was really helpful. But also just start reading job postings, and it helps clarify what it is that you want, and be clear about where you're at. I think is, for me, that's been most helpful, is like knowing where I am and knowing what I want to get to, even if my next step isn't exactly where I want to be, like, is it going to get me closer there? Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer the question?
Definitely, thank you. I think that one of the key things is to maybe, kind of look catty corner to where you are, right? You're not maybe necessarily going to take the next step in the specific career path you're in, like going from a 2 to a 3, but there are things that are analogous or close in different job families that might be applicable. As Elizabeth mentioned, right? Like if you think that it's going to get you closer to your goal, like it might be worth it. And a lot of, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, you know, oftentimes people think of a career ladder where you start here, then you work your way up from 1 to 2, 2 to 3. And typically for job titles, we have a 5 before you get into, as an individual contributor, you're getting into supervisory and management level roles. But those days are gone. I need to repeat this. Those days are gone. people move around today, not necessarily in a career ladder, but a career lattice. So they go from here to here to here, and maybe they go back down, and they go sideways, and they go diagonal to really develop their career. So there isn't necessarily one career path, and you get to define what you want your career to be. That being said, I would say a lot of the things that we just mentioned in terms of developing your skill set, gaining experience, meeting other people, networking, being clear where you want to be. Can you hear me now? I'm seeing a message saying that it's hard to hear me. Am I okay now? Yes? Okay, great. If it goes out again, just let me know. So figuring out, yes, where you want to be, but don't necessarily get so caught up in the end result. And the reason I say that is because along with that, you may realize that I actually really don't like that thing that I thought I liked, or this responsibility, or it seemed really fun. And we've all been there. There's no shame in it, right? You start a sort of role or an industry, and you're like, huh, I did not expect that, which is another reason why informational interviews, which I'm a big, huge fan of, are so important. One, they give you a clue as to what a role or position or a team or an industry can entail. And 2, it gets your name out there. So in terms of where you want to go next, it can signal to people, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm looking for. So the next time they come across that opportunity, something that they might keep you in mind for, they might share with you. I know I've certainly done that with folks, and I've been a beneficiary of that. My previous role, I got into that. I was just doing an informational interview with the person who would then become my boss, and I had no idea. I had no idea that was there. All I know is that I was interested in this arena, and they told me about an opportunity. So those would be some ways to advance in your career in general. And I would just say, be flexible, avoid the idea of one specific path, because there is no one way to get to where you want to be. There are multiple ways to where you want to be.
So if I could also add and just piggyback what Shirley has been saying, and to reiterate that it's not a ladder, it's a lattice. And that in terms of the sort of, kind of steps up doesn't really sort of exist that much. And part of it is also classifications exist to help organize the institution into sort of, levels and kind of what are expected of those positions. So they are in its core thinking about what are the needs of that unit. So what a lot of people think is, I'm currently for example, something level 2. And so if I were to work at a more advanced way, or if once I get more senior, then I would get reclassified to a 3. But actually that's not quite the way that classifications are looking at it, and I'm trying to speak on this, but again, I reiterate that I'm not from the comp team. So, but in terms of the classification is that it's about the business need. So do they have a need in that unit for a position that operates at a more senior level, and either with more independence or to take on more complex projects? Does that work actually exist? And so that's why I think Shirley was talking about is that, people are moving through the lattice and moving sometimes out of the direct team that they're currently with because that opportunity may or may not exist in that unit. It could, and it's certainly, sort of possible to explore that, but it may not. And so that's why, to reiterate the point of thinking that there's no one linear path, and also sometimes it's not about sort of where you must hit a certain point to get to another point. It could also be leaps as well. And so I come back to, it kind of depends on what you are seeking and what you are interested in. And once you have that figured out, then kind of recalling also what something that Elizabeth said that I want to also kind of emphasize too is the self-awareness and of where you are and then where you want to get to. And I think an additional point there that would be helpful is an alignment of that awareness with people around you that would be your either supervisor or someone who would be your sponsor. And so that how you perceive yourself to be and where you would go is reflected by other people. And that will help, I think, in the pathway as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So there's, again, been a lot of really great discussion in chat. James was kind enough to give a little bit of a list of the most common terms for analyst job positions. And so the ones that he mentioned are gathering, preparing, reviewing, and communicating information. So if you think of, again, reframing what you're doing in that way, right? Like maybe you're not necessarily like writing SQL, but if you are, gathering, producing, consuming information, even it doesn't have to be numeric. You are doing some of this work, right, of analysis. Okay, so I think one more question for the panel.
Sorry, I'll add a quick self-anecdote if it's helpful about so as I mentioned, I'm not a data analyst, but I will say that in working with a hiring manager, and we're basically at one point she was hiring for a business systems analyst. It was more for business process and systems, and there's a slight distinction there. But regardless, is that she was looking for a business analyst. And she actually stopped in the middle of our search and asked me if I would be interested. And then, my response to her was, what, why? And so what she said to me was, even in my work in terms of where, she talked about the things that she's looking for and whatever. And then I sort of interpret what she's expressed her needs are. And then through sort of, talking with her and also some of the other members of the search committee, we sort of identify, well, okay, this is what I'm hearing, but this is the information that I think that is the core, or I think is in alignment between the different people. And so that's what we should be looking for. And then how do we then translate that to interview questions that actually are sort of getting at those expertise and those experiences and those demonstrated experiences in terms of asking for specific examples that people can talk about. And so what she said to me was that was interpretation or sort of translation of something that's amorphous or ambiguous, and then kind of clarifying that and then communicating that out clearly. And so in her mind, I don't know if, I would have been successful if I applied it and I didn't, but in her mind, she felt that I had transferable skills to be a business analyst, even in a completely unrelated field. And that's just an example of, again, reframing and thinking about what are you already doing that actually sort of can be applied to a job if you're interested.
Thank you, James. We had a question in chat about if you have advanced Excel skills and no coding skills, and you want to up your data analysis skills, which programs would you recommend? And so we have R definitely voted on twice, and there are also other free coding programs like Python, right, has a really robust data analysis package set now. Tableau is maybe it's like an introduction, like an intermediate software when it comes to coding skills. It can definitely help get you from Excel to coding in like a sort of like relatively painless way, I think. The trouble with Tableau, as with many software tools, is that it's not necessarily free. Tableau does have some tiers, right? It's freemium. You can use it for free with some limited pieces to the features. Elizabeth sent some links. Thank you, Elizabeth. Links to get started with R. Some cheat sheets. Yeah, super great. Thank you. James, as a follow-up question, I was wondering, and maybe you can't, maybe it's not something you want to speak to, but I was wondering if what I'm perceiving, right, which is like sort of a general trend towards more positions being created that are independent contributors, sort of more professional, fewer admin roles, or like where maybe in the past we would have seen something classified as an admin at AA3, I'm seeing them classified as an analyst position. I mean, I was wondering, do you think that that sort of general approach on campus is a reflection of basically like our sort of culture at large? We're getting more and more data out there, and there's so many things that so many pieces to it, right? So many tools to learn, so much information to consume and process. Would you say that that's related?
I'll try to see if I can provide a perception and or just of some considerations or thoughts. So I don't know in general if there's any kind of, and particularly to this group, I don't have any data on an actual trend of positions that and or the way that they're being classified. I would imagine that it's actually more two things. So one is, I think that in general, as sort of over the last several years, and particularly because, and also Berkeley as a campus within the UC system is one of the earlier ones to establish career compass or ladders, and where all of the classifications became a thing. But prior to that, and I think some of the legacy of it is that people tend to just create positions that are more catch-alls. And so sort of an administrator or, you know, there used to be just a catch-all analyst role before they even sort of split that down into sort of different things. So I think that classifications used to sort of just be more, there's now more thought put into classifications and what the position will actually do. And so we're hopefully moving away from more sort of catch-all types of classifications to ones that are a little bit more, not prescriptive per se, but descriptive of what the actual job responsibilities and actions are. And I think so. I think that instead of just being kind of administration or either administrator or an administrative officer, it now is, well, what are the key sort of and primary and majority of responsibilities that this position might be working on, and what other job family might actually sort of reflect that better. So I think that's part of it. And then the other part would be that, and you all would probably know this more than I, but I would say that, yes, I would agree that definitely there's more and more information that's available now, and or that people want to think about, and using data to inform decisions, again, not just financial, but in other types of things as well. And so the ability to sort of, again, kind of seek that, to have the curiosity to seek that, to interpret that, and then to communicate and tell a story with that is becoming more and more inherent in many of the jobs. And, you know, there's other key terms that people will sort of throw out to, and that's related to that, which is creative problem solving, critical thinking, analytical thinking, strategic thinking. And these are all sort of keywords that people will throw out, but they're related to similar things, not always exactly the same, but they're related in terms of just the ability and the interest to not just respond or react to what you're given, but to actually consider what is out there and then to then tell a story about it, and that hopefully reaches towards a goal. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. What I'm hearing what you said is kind of a move away from thinking of job classes or families as domain specific, but really more like cutting across the other way, thinking of sort of the similarity of approaches to what you're doing. That's not domain specific. It's really about like the skill set, what we were just talking about, curiosity. Okay, great. So I'm gonna let the panelists go in a minute. Are there any last questions from the group? Anything you want to say? You guys have been really communicative along the way. Astrid says, as a research unit manager that is trying to grow the unit and recruit top candidates, the point that James made on what opportunities are there within the unit, and do they encompass different career paths? So if my unit is very specific to its career path, it limits the pool. So they can choose to embrace and promote candidates sort of outside of the sphere of the domain, I think is what. Thank you, that's a good comment. Okay. Oh.
I'll say one thing that I think would be helpful, and it's kind of reiterated in different ways a little bit, or touched upon during the panel, but regardless of anything, at the core of getting ahead in your career or shifting into a new job, the things that will help you the most are your own initiative, so the drive and the proactiveness of understanding yourself and what you want, and doing the work to figure out what resources will get you there, reaching out to people. So that drive, that initiative is key. And also courage. And I say that because you don't want to limit yourself. Oftentimes when we think about learning something new, we limit ourselves because we're afraid of making a mistake or being silly or not knowing enough. No, get over it. You know, when we were babies learning how to crawl, nobody cared about falling and looking dumb. That's part of the learning process, right? So go back to when you were learning, you stumbled and you learned and you mastered it overall. So that courage piece of thinking you might fail or you might make a mistake and pushing through anyway is really key. And also courage in terms of imposter syndrome. Sometimes we also just know a lot more than we think. You know, I've heard some people who are on this call will say like, oh, I don't know enough about this. I'm like, really? Because you seem like an expert to me. So I would just say, you know, have the courage to do that, particularly for women. They say that women will look at a job description and they won't apply unless they have maybe like 100% of the, you know, the qualifications met. Whereas men will apply, they're like 60-70%. They're like, hey, good enough. You know, and obviously everybody's different. I'm not saying that hard and fast for everyone. There's a lot of diversity in everyone, but I think it's important to grow into a role as well, right? Because even if your dream job is X, you could prepare yourself to get into the dream job, and then what? You're gonna potentially be bored. You need a little bit of room for growth to keep you stimulated, to keep growing, to keep you having mastery, which is a big part of employee engagement, right? Mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So just some things to keep in mind: the courage and the drive and initiative to put yourself out there, figure out what it is that you need to learn, and connect with those that can really help you out. Don't be afraid to let people know what you're interested in.
That's perfect, Shirley. Thank you. So before I let you go, I think Shirley gave us her her takeaway from this, from the panel, would you say? I think, yes. James and Elizabeth, is there one concept that you would like the group to take away from your panel? James first, or Elizabeth first. Sorry, Elizabeth first. I always forget.
I don't know that I have anything really like concise and beautiful to say, but I think I'm gonna echo Shirley that, yeah, put yourself out there and try what you're interested in. I think there's just so much room that you just have to find it, right? Like most jobs have some place, like maybe your boss needs a chart for some presentation. Can you do that? Like maybe you don't have a lot of experience, you know, like there's all these ways that you can find a place to do more than you know you are doing right now. That's it.
Perfect, thank you.
So, yeah, I also don't know if I have a sort of a beautiful, succinct sort of thing because many kind of different elements came up. I guess I would just kind of go back and to kind of emphasize an element that is Berkeley is very large and very broad, and it seems kind of daunting to try and navigate, but that it's also a culture, in my personal experience thus far anyway, that really does embrace sort of growth of people and also embrace people's talent and encourages that. So there are certainly resources such as CAN that we see here that where people want to help each other grow. So even, and I, talked about kind of the alignment of knowing what you may be interested in and then aligning that with others. And even the exploration of that would take sort of that step in terms of asking that question or starting to even think about it. But that there seems, I would say that it's my belief that there's a community that exists in various capacities to help. So, so take the step and reach out and ask questions.
Well said, thank you so much. So there's kind of two chunks to this presentation. It's a little bit unconventional. Panelists first, but there's going to be a second piece now that talks about sort of the nitty gritty or the logistics, the how, if the panelists have been sort of like the what and the why. And so I encourage you all to stay if that's interesting to you. I think I'd like to do like a 5-minute bio break. So maybe come back at 11:08. Does that sound good to everyone? Katie? Cool. All right, well, I'll see you guys at 11:08, and thanks again to my panelists. You guys are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
The invitation and for everyone for listening. Bye-bye.
Okay, welcome back. I was really worried that like I would come back and there would be like 2 people. I was like, well, the upside of that would be that we could have a really cozy chat. So I'm glad to see you all. I'm going to stop being the moderator of chat and flip over to sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay, so we're a little bit behind. I was really happy to see that the panel ran a little bit longer than anticipated. So I don't want to keep you beyond the time. And to that end, I might just sort of skip through a couple of these slides. My hope is that you can kind of use the slides as like a checklist or an outline, a place to get started. honestly, that's kind of the general idea behind this whole presentation, is that a lot of times it's going to be really hard to feel like you can grasp a concept because you're just overwhelmed by so many pieces, right? You're like, I don't know where to start. So the goal of this is really just sort of help other folks navigate the resources even to learn about data literacy. Okay, so I'm going to briefly touch on now the key concepts in data literacy and how to upskill. I think we kind of touched a little bit on the definition of data literacy, but where it intersects with the Cal Assessment Network and with my network, the Cal Data Visualization Network, is around communicating effectively with data, right? Consuming and producing informational products to people. So that's my focus today. There are many other pieces, though, to the concept in general. And so I encourage you to look at some of the resources that are in the Drive folder for a broader perspective, and surprisingly a lot of scholarly literature out there on data literacy in the frame of teaching it in school, right? That's something that a lot of us haven't really had because we're in a unique point in time, right? Until about a decade ago, access to data and the tools of its transformation were basically reserved for specialists. And increasingly within the last 10 years, as a result of so much data being available, people are being asked more and more to incorporate some kind of data analysis in their daily work. And that can be a bit of a challenge if you don't want to, or you're not really necessarily inclined to sort of learn the stuff on the fly. And there's just so many pieces to it around, like, you know, to what extent do you need to know the technical tools? Yeah, your own sort of interest, the time, your ability to spend the time on it. So, right. We'll touch briefly on the basic data types, structure and storage, and then sort of the general tips around how to interpret data visualizations. Basically reading them, either producing or consuming them, it's really important that you're able to sort of interpret what you're seeing, right? And make sure that the context lines up with intent. So as the panelists discussed in detail, the key skills that you need to be literate with data involve things that are not technical or math related at all. They're curiosity, problem solving, domain contextualization, which is knowing enough about the content of what you're looking at to be able to know that you're creating meaning with the analysis. Visualization, and finally storytelling. The word gets thrown around a lot, but what that really means is you've synthesized something and you've put something together and you want to explain it in a way that's helpful to others, right? Like you're not just doing the analysis. That last step of like helping other people understand it from your perspective. It's really important to know the basics of narrative, because that's kind of how human beings process information, right? It's in that narrative structure. So to the point I was saying earlier, a lot of us haven't like learned some of these things in school, and or maybe we haven't sort of used any of these skills since school. So this is a great example of like stepping back and wondering, like, how do you even know how to read a chart, right? Asking that question of yourself, I think is really useful, because there are lots of components to reading charts that maybe you're not even, thinking about, that go into the process of consuming that information. So Larry says, can you repeat the domain contextualization again? Yeah, so basically what you're doing when you're either consuming or producing a data product, right, is that you are making meaning. And without the context of the domain that you're looking at it, you're not going to be able to make any meaning of it, right? You're not going to know, like, so an example is the group of all people who wear eyeglasses and then the group of all deer who wear eyeglasses, right? Like those numbers, without the context, might be something that you're going to look at or think about, and if you put the context in there of eyeglasses, people, and deer, you're going to know that they don't wear glasses, right? So there's not going to be an overlap. So that sort of outrageous example is a way to call attention to the fact that like there's so much you're processing already that you don't even know you're processing, right? Coming back to the chart, there's so many pieces to it that are happening instantaneously for you, and they're really informed by those sort of softer skills. Okay, so one thing that came out of all the literature on data literacy is sort of general low-level anxiety around it. What do you think the percentage of US workers is that considers themselves data literate? I was kind of surprised. 28% consider themselves to be data literate. That is of the workforce that actually uses and works with data every day. So there's a real general disconnect, right? So many people have access now to the tools, right, for data analysis. Yeah, 2/3 of respondents to a survey put out by Accenture is 2/3 of folks said that they have access to some software tools in their daily work, but only 20% said they feel comfortable using it. And that kind of bears out with my sort of anecdotal experience of talking to folks about data visualization. A lot of folks think they know it's important and they think it's interesting, but they don't feel like they really know anything about it or how to use it or, you know, be proficient at it. Okay, so another statistic is 1 in 5 people on the globe use Excel, or they have access to Excel on their computers. So 1 in 5 of the professional people in the entire world use Excel. So I think a lot of the panelists touched on this as well. There's sort of universality, right? The lingua franca of data analysis is Excel. Almost all of us have it, and we use it to some degree, right? But I think a lot of us don't really think that we know enough, in quotes, about the tool itself. So briefly, I wanted to look at this visualization. If you haven't heard of Edward Tufte, he is a big proponent of using visualizations to communicate clearly and cleanly, and he's developed a lot of sort of the general best practices of data visualization that we all use. Looking at the left and the right, these are 2 charts related to the same concept. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up a minute after launch and killed everyone on board, obviously. And in the aftermath of that, there's a lot of reviewing of the data and literature available to the folks who made the decisions to launch prior to that launch. And long story short, due to an inability to relate some of the key factors around the failure of the equipment, the engineers were not able to sufficiently communicate to leadership that they should not go through with the launch, and they were overridden by political forces. So the night before the Challenger launch, people were trying to convince them not to launch, but they didn't have an adequate way to describe why not. So on the right-hand side of this is the part of the chart set that actually was provided by NASA. The whole deal is that apparently O-rings, which couple things together, have a resiliency that diminishes really quickly at certain temperature fluctuations. So basically when it's really cold out, your O-rings will break when they get superheated really fast. And on the right-hand side, this is what they're trying to convey to folks using that visualization. So each of the rockets is a sequential launch, right? So in time, it's chronological. And then there's this whole situation with like the legend and how they're color coding pieces and what it means. So I think that's pretty clear that's not clear. On the left is Tufte's reviz, right? He revised this information and put it together in this chart here, where he plotted O-ring damage index against the ambient temperature. And when you understand that context of the domain, you realize that you're looking at a picture of a tragedy, right? That could have been easily prevented. After just repackaging the data, not even like reanalyzing it, it's really clear from Tufte. He made it really clear, right, that there are 0 launches that happened when the temperature is below 66 that didn't have any damage to the O-rings, right? So basically what it means is like you have to have warmish climate, otherwise the change in temperature is going to badly affect your O-rings, sometimes to the point of complete failure, right? So the 12 at the top of the Y axis here indicates like utter total failure. And the index itself, you can read up more about it. I have links in the document. But the point is no one at NASA put this together by using the axis of temperature, right? They weren't able to describe and show things in this way, and so that other people couldn't basically consume the information appropriately. Okay, so there, like, we've been talking about it, you know, all morning. There's just so much to learn, right? And there's so many things that could take your attention, and we all have very, very limited time. So there's got to be a way, right, to sort of hack this and make it easier on yourself. The good news is that you don't have to learn, you know, R if your data role is a consumer of information, right? There's different rubrics and different sets depending on what you're looking at, definitions and titles for data roles. But in general, there are folks who clean it and manage it, make sure it's secure. There's folks who transform it and aggregate it. And then there's folks who use it, right? They consume it to make decisions. And sometimes those roles overlap. But those are sort of the very, very general high level groups. And so the set of things that you need to learn as a user, right? Either a user or a consumer is not as technical as it used to be, right? Because of the rise of information and the sheer amount of data out there, and the increasing level of tool sophistication, right? We have things that have graphical user interfaces. We have embedded analytics where in the tool that you're using to manage your work, there are charts and graphs embedded, right? Aggregates, top level infographics. Those are all things that we are using every day to make decisions around data that are not highly technical. But so there's a simple, easy way to sort of decide if it's worth learning. There's this four square chart here. Left to right is usefulness of the feature, and then up and down is the time to learn it. If you sort of generally apply this, right, it's obviously very, very loose structure. But if you approach a software or an idea or a process with this in mind, you can figure out if it's going to be worth it to you to incorporate learning it into your work role. So an example of that is, this is from the Harvard Business Review. This is great. What Excel feature should I learn? So dozens of articles written by Excel experts revealed the 100 most useful features, which are plotted. So I found this kind of bore out with my own personal lived experience. A lot of times you'll see, you know, super cool hack or like, you know, hotkeys for Excel, but then they're weird combinations of things you're never going to need, or it's like 4 hotkey buttons all at once and the alt and the, you know, function key. So it's not something you're going to remember, especially if you don't necessarily need it all the time. So they plotted out all of this stuff here, and that helped them sort of make a decision around what's super important or useful to learn. And they put together an infographic chart, a PDF of that I put in the resources folder. And it actually is the top 100 most useful Excel tips to speed up your work, right? It's very cool. So going back real quickly to this list here, I want to touch on visible thinking as well. Visible thinking is really cool. So a lot of this is like, you know, great in theory, but really how do you learn critical thinking, right? How do you do that without, like, you know, taking a whole course? And so this link here is to visible thinking, which is a project put together by Harvard, and it's a really great like set of tools that you can use to approach sort of any topic and learn to use the skills around critical thinking to apply it to basically any domain. We're getting very, very low on time, so I'm going to skip over. I have a discussion here of how to read charts, right, and how to choose a chart. So I encourage you to look at that when you have time. And if you would like to play along, do a quick assessment of your own data literacy. This slide has the link to it. It's dataliteracyproject.org/assessment. I'm going to check out chat here. Yeah, sorry, it's always the cat, right? The cat is the I should have locked her outside. Thank you, Katie. Thank you. So the assessment link is right there. We're super low on time, so if you have to hop off, I understand, but I'll give folks 2 minutes to fill it out. It's very short. Oh, I am too. I'm trying to redo the quiz with you guys. Of course. Go figure. Well, when you are able to get there, I highly encourage it. It's just a handful of questions. It's a free assessment of your data literacy level. And then what's cool is they give you a roadmap according to what you feel like your own level is. The assessment itself is not perfect, right? There's a lot of problems with the choices they give you, but they have set up, what's really cool here is like ways to actually advance in the target skill set that's part of the toolbox of data literacy according to the level that you've reported for yourself. And there's 4 personas with chunks of, you know, how confident you feel you are in your data literacy. So let's see, if I drag this here. So the assessment is here on this web page. I'm not going to reload it because I might lose it, but they have this whole section of little modules to learn specific ideas, and it goes from overview all the way through to highly specific things. And there's like a little thing in there that says how long it'll take to learn it, so it's very like manageable, right? And the data literacy project itself is part of a thing put together by Click, which is a tool. So I always kind of am a little skeptical because if things are made to sort of buy something that's going to try and charge me money, but Click plus this group called Accenture put this together, and it seems pretty legitimate. So far, there hasn't been anything, and they genuinely want people to be literate in data. So I highly recommend it as a resource. And the other resources that I didn't have a chance to touch on listed here, along with in the chat. We had some amazing additions. Thank you to everyone who put links in the chat. At the bottom here, there's a handful of assessments. Some of them are longer. Some of them like you have to like log in or you know, pay money. So I didn't use those in this example, but they're there if you're interested in furthering that. And then briefly, when it comes to like the actual technical skills, Cal Data Visualization Network has what's called masterminds. These groups, like little subgroups of our network, that get together around a specific software and meet and sort of learn from each other. It's informal, it's peer learning. And right now we have one on Excel, one for Tableau, and one for SQL. And they're very, very cool. So if you go to the link to the network here in the slide set, it goes to our newsletter. You can sign up there and check off what you're interested in, so we can get you more information about that specific topic. And we're out of time, but are there any last questions anyone wants to ask?
All right. Well, Kari, I want to thank you so much for organizing this session, both parts 1 and parts 2. I'm glad we have the slides so we can carefully go through what you've curated for us. Let's give her a big round of applause using your reaction button. Yay! And I'm going to send the slides, the Zoom recording, and the Zoom chat from today to the CAN listserv. I hope the session has helped you with your professional development and also to feel connected to this community of practice. I hope that also that your family are safe and well, and that you have a wonderful 3-day weekend. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Kari. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kari.